Welcome to the Good and Basic Podcast, a long-form conversation between Joseph and Joseph, meandering between technology, history, philosophy, especially practical philosophy. We like the kind of philosophy that is...
Especially philosophical technology.
Yes, the technology of philosophy, philosophy of technology, technosophy of philology, and philology of technosophy. All that good stuff. So our social media information...
Philology is, but I'm not sure about the rest.
I am not sure what What would technosophy be?
Technosophy.
Sophos is wisdom. Like techne is like a skill,
Technique
or like an art. So
practical knowledge.
Wisdom, wise, actually.
Yeah, that's actually really good.
Maybe we're into technosophy. Technosophy.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So
that's not a thing.
We learn things. We hope you learn things too. Our social media information is in the description. We hope you enjoy our videos. We love your feedback and talking with you in the comments. So without further ado, what we wanted to talk about today was the liberal arts. We're backtracking sort of a little bit, as we often do, to a video that you put out a month ago or so.
Yes.
About your
the end of semester.
Yes, about your experience teaching at a liberal arts college for a year. So maybe the right way to handle this is, do you want to kind of sum up your thoughts in that video, and then we'll kind of use that as an anchor point from which to deviate and also to come back to from time to time.
Yes, I want to do one more thing than that, which is to explain briefly your and my experiences, or rather backgrounds with liberal arts.
Okay.
So
yeah, let's do that.
Both of us have attended liberal arts high schools, same one actually.
Mm-hmm.
That's how we became friends. And then in addition to that, both of us have kind of been nibbling at the edges of this idea of what the liberal arts is in kind of our general reading. You're reading Isocrates right now, studying that. So we both have a background as students, but we also both have a background as teachers. You were a freshman writing teacher at a major university. Mm-hmm. This last year I was a kind of wearing a whole bunch of hats, liberal arts teacher at a small liberal arts college. Mm-hmm. And so this is something that has been lurking around the edges of a lot of our discussions for a very, very long time. Yeah, I would certainly say that, like, for somebody who does not want to necessarily be a teacher, like, I feel like I obsess about education a lot. Like, every school that I've gone to, like, I've kind of picked apart, and I've been like, well, I like this and I don't like this. I personally think you're delaying the inevitable. Yeah, well, time will tell, so... yeah. Anyway, so I mean, as you said, this is something that we've both been chewing on in regards to ourselves and in regards to, broader society for a really, really, really long time. Yeah, since high school at least, and probably earlier. Mm-hmm. So this last year I taught the third-year curriculum for a small liberal arts college, and this is a college with only one major. It's kind of a just general studies degree with a huge smattering of philosophy and history and a little bit of economics, and then there's the practical skills about how to live off-grid. But on this liberal arts side, which is kind of the philosophy, history, and economics, there's a lot of really rich stuff there. Oh, also comparative religion is a major thing that we study in third-year curriculum. What is it that makes that special? What is it that can offer to you? Because it's not really aimed at getting you a job. At least not directly. Unless you want to be a museum curator or a teacher or something. I'm actually this is kind of why I was hoping you would sum up your video, because to give us like an anchor place, because I kind of want to. I mean, my attitude toward this problem is just take a pot shot at that assumption at all, and to say, well, wait a second. I understand that there are a lot of colleges that are self-described as liberal arts colleges, right? And I look at them and I'm like, a hip term. Are you a liberal? Like, what is the liberal arts? Because you have your definition, and I have my own definition that is accumulated from experience, from personal experience, then also from study. And Monticello College has its definition, right? Yeah. And I'm like, whoa. Like, it feels like the very first thing we have to settle is just definitions. Okay, so right? I'll summarize the video. But I know. I do agree. I'm not trying to be too obnoxious or pedantic here. Like, when people think liberal arts colleges, they don't think job preparation. And they don't think the same thing necessarily. That is a huge concern, especially because I would argue that the term liberal arts has been watered down a lot lately. It might be helpful to set just a couple of definitions. The word liberal, it's from the same root word as liberty. If it's from an old Latin word, liber refers to the bark of trees, which is something that used to be used to make paper, supposedly. So that's why library, liberty, and liberal arts are all related terms. They all come from these same roots. And liber, as I understand it, used to be used as an adjective to describe someone who was not a slave. So a liberal arts education is the arts that make you not a slave, or the arts of the people who already aren't slaves. It's a free person's degree. Now, exactly what kind of freedom we mean, that's another whole rabbit hole to get into. But in the
I was going to say, if I could comment, I find that to be like a really satisfying definition.
Mm-hmm.
The only place where I don't find it to be satisfying is obviously that it doesn't necessarily describe liberal arts colleges today.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also think it's profitable to sort of start from other directions and work at it, not from a definitional perspective, but from an experiential perspective towards definitions.
Very much.
And then, of course, as you're pointing out, right, like there's that whole question, right? Okay, well, like, what kind of education does make you free, right?
Yeah.
Like this is a definition that asks more questions than it answers, but it does ask interesting questions. Yeah,
very good questions.
I mean, that's just my quick take on it before we.
Yeah. So some of the key highlights from this last year, the format that we used was read a book, discuss the book. So essentially, like a very, very high-end book club, where everybody's committed and everybody's there with notes prepared and has read the whole book, which is kind of a rare thing among book clubs, to be honest. But in the classes, we would read a book like, say, Herodotus or Josephus, some of these old histories, and then have a discussion. Now, the idea of a discussion is a little bit terrifying if you haven't done it, but it's also incredibly addictive if you have. And that is, you get people in a room and they have their own ideas, and you don't necessarily have a defined direction or curriculum you're following. It's, what did you find in this book that's worth talking about? You raise an issue with one student, and then another student picks up that ball and then runs with it, and adds in what they thought, and then there's some disagreements, and something emerges as kind of an emergent property from the group that is greater than the studies of any of the individuals.
It's very much interest-driven rather than curriculum-driven.
Very interest-driven, and very much what did you notice? And frankly, if you read the same book multiple times, you'll pick out different things, and the discussions are never going to be identical.
Which, at least for Monticello College, is not only a virtue, but is actually part of the definition of what they would regard as a classic, is a book that is worth reading more than once.
Yes, that you can get value from multiple times, preferably over and over again ad infinitum.
Yeah.
But one thing that I found really interesting is this process. You can think of it as it's not just the knowledge that you gain from these discussions. It's not just the pure content, but it's the muscles that you work out by discussing that really take a huge influence on you. Reading these books and having these very rich discussions about the topics in history and religion, I noticed kind of startling changes in terms of the character of my students, how open they were, how willing they were to hear another side, how well they were able to defend a position. And it's weird that both of those grow at the same time. Both you become better at defending a position, which you could imagine would make you more stubborn, and also becoming more open at the same time. It was really remarkable. And that's just kind of my own testimonial from a year teaching this stuff, and then seeing the end of year result and saying, this has made a huge difference. These are better people qualitatively now than they were when they entered the school at the beginning of the year. And that was a really, really inspiring thing to see. It was amazing. I felt honored to have been able to participate in that in some way.
Okay. Does the place where we want to go from this, sorry, I'm just trying to figure out where to go because there's a lot of threads here, but I'm trying to figure out, should we talk about the charge that the liberal arts does not prepare you for a job? Because I can think of at least two defenses against that.
That
and
was
both
the entire comment section from that video.
And both are interesting defenses. So at least as I see it, there's two basic ways to defend against that charge. Either you can say, yes, the liberal arts does actually prepare you for a job, or you can say, no, it doesn't prepare you for a job, but it is still valuable in some other vital sense that justifies it.
Yes.
Right, and I actually think we can probably go down both roads here.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I think the most honest and I don't know, which one do you want to take first? Because my inclination was to take that's stupid. You don't want an education necessarily that prepares you for a job. But at the same time, you need to eat. And so
I was going to say, actually, I have a quote from Isocrates for both of these. So I don't care which road we go down because I am prepped, man. I am locked and loaded. So actually, let's tackle the job one because I sense that your position is mostly, well, no, it doesn't prepare you for a job, but it's still valuable.
Well, I can make
with the
both
exception of,
arguments
say,
really
like,
well.
with the exception
Yeah.
of law and things like that.
With the
Law and
exception-
academia, basically.
Law, academia. The weird thing about some of these more liberal arts degrees. So the classic one that still exists in the universities today that I would consider a very liberal arts heavy degree is a philosophy degree. And if you look at the statistics for philosophy majors,
Socrates has just entered the chat and he does not like your comment.
that's
Sorry,
fine,
go ahead,
that's fine.
go ahead.
He doesn't have to like it. It can still be true.
He's gonna frickin' blow you out. Sorry, okay.
A guy who has been dead for over 2,000 years just entered the chat. I'm deeply honored. That's the fun thing about
I know, right?
liberal arts
There's
discussions.
well, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it's interesting
They're
too because
surrounded by
like
these ghosts, these personalities. That,
I'll always remember when I was in one of my first courses in my grad program, the professor talked to us about academic conferences where people go to present their ideas in the form of these 10-minute papers. These 10-minute papers that they read are these 10-minute presentations. And what she said was, questions are always a compliment. Always. Even if they're attacking you, you know, even if they disagree with you, does not matter. Still a compliment because it establishes that you are a worthy interlocutor. You're a worthy opponent. It's worth talking to you. Yeah.
Worth engaging.
So,
Yeah.
so
Which means
whenever people enter the chat, that's almost always a good thing. So,
Yeah.
Sorry, but you were saying.
Gosh, Socrates just entered the chat. I'm just going to revel in that.
Yeah.
With a philosophy major, one thing that's kind of interesting is if you look at the stats on how easy it is to pass the LSAT, which is the law school admissions test, or how easy it is to transfer your knowledge and logic into something like computer programming. It creates a base of knowledge that then becomes very liquid. You could think of like...
Well, and also those skill set, those muscles you were talking about.
Yes,
Right.
and you can use those muscles in multiple places. It's not
There
like
are
you're
reasons
never going
why
to think in your life.
There are,
Yeah.
Imagine that,
That
right?
will never be useful. What are you ever going to do that? Yeah.
Yeah, well...
It's not like you never think at your job, and some jobs require different thinking than others, and it won't give you the specific skills, but it might increase the speed at which you learn them, and that's a really valuable thing. And it might also prepare you with that kind of soft skill set that employers have such a hard time finding, mixes of leadership and honor and how quickly you're able to learn something and how well you're able to move between being a leader and a follower. And that is a really interesting thing to negotiate. Also, the fact that you've been in discussions before where sometimes you press your position and sometimes you listen and step back means that you're just a really valuable person to have around. And will that be recognized in the workforce? Depending on where you're at? Yes, absolutely it will. It has been in my experience.
There's some asterisks there, but yeah.
Yeah.
I want to push in on that even further. Are you
Sure,
okay?
go
All right,
for
we
it.
had a good point. So, one thing that comes to mind is that I constantly hear people, usually people with certain sort of political predilections, and they're like, well, which it's fine to have political predilections, obviously, even these political predilections, that's fine. But the point is, I hear them say, liberal arts colleges, it's terrible, because it's a no good, useless degree that doesn't teach them anything, and then they're not prepared for the workforce, right?
Yeah, and then they
I'm
become
like,
a barista with $300,000 worth of student debt.
exactly. Yeah. And I look at that, and there is a solid argument there, and like I'll be the first to jump on the dog pile on modern American universities because I do think that they've got a lot of things wrong, right? But I look at that and I'm like, does it really suit your political philosophy that you want a bunch of people who can execute jobs but not think in a general and broad way, that they're not possessed of good judgment, they can't think critically about things, they can't address generalized problems? Is that what you want? Because I know that's not what you want. That's not, all your other Facebook posts are saying the exact opposite. And so I do see that interesting inconsistency there. And I think, if pressured, I think most people would say, well, no, wait a second. We do want to prepare people for jobs because jobs are actually kind of important. Like we don't have another way of doing this right now. But no, it's not the only important thing. Like, of course there are forms of education there are all kinds of things in your life that are valuable that aren't directly tied to your job.
There's a way to defend that position a little bit more because the trouble is a liberal arts education, if it was the real deal, if it was a liberal arts education that trained you to think at a higher level and to lead at a higher level and to negotiate at a higher level, and to have a rich base in culture and history and philosophy and rhetoric and economics and all this stuff so that you could just think broadly and make connections and see. Would that be worth $100,000 worth of student loan debt? I could make an argument that that's a yes. Granted, that's a huge amount of money, and I generally don't like debt, so that's still scary. Mm-hmm. But I see there's enough value there to make paying that worth it. Now, here's the question. Are you getting the real deal? And that, I think, is where that critique of the barista with $300,000 of student loan debt becomes way more valid, because the trouble with the liberal arts education is just because they say it's liberal arts doesn't mean it actually is.
Again, we're back to this problem of conflicting definitions and, frankly, unclear definitions.
One way I like to think of it, there's a book that has been floating around in the homeschool community for ages, and it's related to the college where I teach. It's called a Thomas Jefferson education. And the way they're defining a liberal arts education is kind of using Thomas Jefferson as a paragon of, being creative and interested in a whole bunch of different things and incredibly well read. Mm-hmm. There's that quote from, I think it's
he is an
Ronald
excellent
Reagan.
Poster boy for this.
He's a great poster boy because he's kind of an 18th century Renaissance man who was just full of interest in everything. He was, working on the moldboard plow one day and then
casually writes the Declaration of Independence one day, founds a university the next day, works on the moldboard plow the third day, and then is a diplomat in France the fourth languages. Day, right? Like there's
and writing home about permaculture principles to his daughter on how to manage the garden the next day after that.
Yeah.
So there's a breadth, a real rich breadth that makes him able to be excellent in a lot of different areas, and he has some excellence that's transferable. So in this education model, there's a bunch of little aphorisms, little things that they say are kind of tags that you'll find in a real liberal arts education. And one of them is that you inspire rather than require. And one of them is that you use classics rather than textbooks. Another is that you use mentors rather than professors. And some of these things are really about inspiring the student to do their own thinking. You teach them how to think, not what to think. And that I think is the single biggest difference between a real liberal arts education and the hack superintend. Tell him how you really feel, Joseph. But the difference there is incredibly critical. If you look at Socrates as an example, and I've used this example a couple of times, his students founded different philosophies from him. His direct first-generation students, Plato became obsessed with the raw ideas. He's a complete idealist. And then you have the guy who founded the Cynics, considers Socrates his teacher. A guy, I can't remember his name. I want to say Gyges, and that's the wrong name.
It is, and I wish I could step in and save you here.
I unfortunately can't. The Ring of Gyges is one of the Platonic, one of Plato's ideas. But, gosh, that's going to eat me alive. He's the guy who lived in a barrel.
Diogenes,
that's the one. And then you have a couple of sophists, and so there's a lot of diversity among the students. In other words, the students are not being taught what to think, they're being taught how to think. And the muscle is their own, and where they take it is their own. The degree eventually becomes a reflection of their own values, not a set of values that are inculcated on them.
So I actually think that this would be a great point while we're defending the virtues of a liberal arts education, even if it doesn't prepare you for a job. For a quote from my favorite Greek philosopher who no one has ever heard of, which is, let's see, he's talking about what qualifies as education here. And basically, so he says this, okay, so he's talking about the arts, and the word there is technai, right? So technai, technical. Sciences, epistemi, epistemology, knowledge, and then specialized abilities, which I think probably refers to like Olympic athletes and other people who have sort of like specialized technical skills. Like he might also be referring to people there. I think he's referring to people there who could roof a house, people who could repair a truck, or people who can do pivot tables in Excel.
Sure.
Right. Those are specialized abilities. Science as epistemi sounds to me a lot like philosophy, abstract knowledge.
Yeah, especially episteme. That seems to be what that.
Yeah. And then arts, which is technai. That one's a little harder.
Because it includes crafts.
It might mean arts and crafts, or crafts might be under specialized abilities. I'm not sure. But these is kind of a smattering of what he's taking a pot shot at.
He says none of those count.
Yeah, he says none of those count. He says all those who excel in arts, in sciences, and in specialized abilities, that's not real education. And what he says about them is he says, I see that some of those who are so devoted to precision in these exercises that they even teach others do not use the knowledge they have in the right way. And in fact, in other subjects, they have less good sense than their students, dare I say, even their slaves.
This is a thing that Nassim Taleb talks about, that if you take a statistics professor and somebody who teaches statistics for a living, and then ask a couple of posers a couple questions that relate to statistical knowledge outside of the domain where they typically use statistics, that they tend to make errors at a staggeringly high rate, pretty similar to normal average people. And that's because the knowledge is contained within a domain, and as soon as you step out of that domain, even that knowledge doesn't apply well into a new area.
Which is something that I think it's something that your vision of the liberal arts is directly intended to counteract.
It's to try to eliminate some of those barriers.
It's to decompartmentalize and to generalize, to cross-pollinate, to make something interdisciplinary.
Yeah,
he goes
bizarrely is one of the very few types of education that will make you more creative.
He goes on to say, for I know that most of these, the people who are expert in art sciences and specialized abilities, for I know that most of these do not manage their own affairs well, are intolerable in private gatherings, have contempt for the opinions of their fellow citizens, and are filled with many other serious faults. As a result, I do not think even these men have the qualities I am talking about. Whom then do I call educated, since I exclude those in the arts and sciences and abilities? First, those who manage well the daily affairs of their lives and can form an accurate judgment about a situation, and in most cases can figure out what is the best course of action. Right? He's like, okay, so what's the bar for being educated? Well, can you make good decisions and manage your life well?
I really like that because it's, are you good at humaning?
Yeah, well, and I mean, it's a very Greek view too, right? Because the Greek conception of virtue, like at least one way of translating it is to be a good person is to human well.
Yeah,
right. It's to be a good human.
Excellently.
Yeah, to human excellently. Right, and so exactly. Then he says, next those who behave appropriately and fairly towards other people, and conduct themselves as gently and modestly as possible. I'm kind of paraphrasing here and skipping through. Next, those who are always in control of their pleasures and are not excessively overwhelmed by their troubles, but endure them with a stout heart and a nature worthy of our common humanity. Fourth, and most important, those who are not corrupted by their good fortune, do not abandon their true selves, or become arrogant, but on the contrary, remain in the ranks of those with good sense, and do not rejoice more in the successes that come to them by chance than those that come through their own good nature and good sense. So then, I say that the ones who are wise and complete and possess all the virtues are those whose minds are well fitted not only for one of these areas of life, but for all of them. This then is what I know about those who are educated.
Yes.
And that's basically the liberal arts approach. It's like, okay, well, we need, or at least the liberal arts approach that you are proposing is, okay, well, we need to generalize, right? Like, what use is it? Like you need to be able to manage your own life well and move knowledge across disciplines and areas. That's what education is.
Yes, and not just between the disciplines that are typically taught in school. It's not that you're a generalist at all the subjects that were taught in grade school. It's that you can human well. We're talking about breadth at the highest level, kind of.
Yeah, well, and I mean, like he says,
it's a virtue.
These people are intolerable at private gatherings, have contempt for the opinions of their fellow citizens, and are filled with many other serious faults. And like you often read about like these genius savants in a certain field who are absolutely, it is impossible to live with them, right? It's impossible to get along with them.
Contemptible human beings who are just really, really good at one thing.
And it's not like there isn't some virtue there.
Oh, there
right?
is.
But Isocrates' counter is, you're not humaning well. That's not the best an education can give you.
Yeah. The ideal education increases your humility, your discipline, your courage, your compassion, your temperance, your intelligence, your creativity, your ability to problem solve, your ability to listen, your ability to lead, your ability to follow, your ability to do all of these things. And in terms of the reasoning ability, I think this is one of the areas where you can see a difference fairly quickly. One of the degrees which is more traditionally associated with the liberal arts is a law degree. And it is a truism taught at every law school. Like they will warn you that you are going to become insufferable at Thanksgiving dinner that first year that you're going to law school. And why is that? It's because your eyes have been opened a little bit. You're a sophomore. A sophomore is a wise idiot in Greek. Soph as in philosophy, sophos. And then the more is same root that we get the word moron from. But what's funny is that in your first Thanksgiving at home, after a few months of taking law school classes, your reasoning will have been sharpened to the point where you can see the holes in all of your family's arguments. And if you don't have some compassion and good social sense, you're going to point out all of them. And try to make your point heard, and you're going to feel yourself super intelligent, because there is a change. You do see things more clearly than you did before, but you haven't integrated it to the point where you can be a decent human being again. But it is interesting that you can increase in that reasoning ability so fast. Like, there's real gains to be made here. You can become a better human being by means of education. And the word education is interesting. It's from the same root as the word ductile, like a metal.
To draw it into a wire.
To draw out, like to pull out qualities that are already in you out into the open and make them stronger and better. And that's a really cool thing, to draw these qualities out of your heart and soul.
Yes, I'm sorry. I recognize this is the point where I'm supposed to say something. I've been desperately searching for another quote.
Well, let me make
go
pitch
ahead.
for why it's actually good for helping you to get a job.
Oh, good. That's what
I
I'm going to.
find that in our generation, I think we're both technically millennials.
Yeah, we're kind of in a lost place, actually, where we're a little too young to be millennials and we're a little too old to be Generation X, and it's an incredibly uncomfortable situation. But
I think
here we are.
Millennials.
We are by
classic
strict
millennials.
definition millennials, but we're right at the tail end, and so
Culturally we're in a little bit of a weird spot.
Yeah.
The thing that's kind of interesting in our generation that I've noticed is that in the jobs that I've had, and I've worked as a high school teacher, as a fertilizer warehouse tech, unloading train cars. I've worked on construction crews. I've worked as a magazine writer. I've held a number of different positions, and I found that to outcompete most of everybody, it's these qualities that are built by the liberal arts that really make you stand out. Can you show up to work on time? How good are you at listening to instructions and writing down precisely what the boss wants you to do? How good are you at suggesting respectfully an improvement to what's already happening? And I mean, it's that kind of stuff that instantly makes you rise to the top and get the job, keep the job, and generally get the raise and do well. And, that is deeply useful. Now, I don't think that liberal arts education replaces all technical information by any stretch. With a general liberal arts degree, there's a lot of things that are very specific and very technical that Isocrates would not call real education, but still require training and discipline and schooling. For instance, engineering. With a general liberal arts degree, maybe it is possible that would help me in an engineering school to do better faster than my natural abilities would be. But, I wouldn't be able to do any engineering without that specific training.
it is worth noting that Isocrates is probably pushing a little bit on this for rhetorical effect.
Yeah.
It's not like he thinks that if you can roof a house or do pivot tables in Excel, you're a dum-dum. That's not the point. He's just like, look, that's not enough.
It's not enough.
Yeah.
And that's the right way to think of it,
Yeah.
because it's still useful. It's just not enough to make you a good human being.
Mm-hmm. A truly educated person.
Yes, truly.
I did air quotes there for those of you who are only listening to the audio.
So, liberal arts then.
I'm ready to... Sorry, I know I'm in the right section. What I'll say in the meantime, though, so we've kind of pivoted into saying, well, not only are the liberal arts valuable, even if they don't help you get a job, but that they also are actually quite a bit more valuable for helping you get a job than it looks. And what I continually think of in respect to that is I have some background in business intelligence, market research, consulting, data analysis, sort of like that conglomeration of things. I'm doing some freelance work in that area now, and then I've also done a couple of pretty high quality internships in that area. And so a lot of what you're doing is coding and data analysis, right? It's all applying statistical tests, right? It's highly technical. And do you want to know something? What I find most valuable in that work, what I find most important, is not the ability to run the statistical tests. It's the ability to have your brain turned on and ask the right questions.
The right questions.
Yes.
Because you can get a good technical answer to the wrong question. It does not help you at all.
And that is the skill that is, I think, cultivated by a liberal arts education. So if I remember correctly, I got the story from my professor years ago, and so I hope all the details are correct. But it illustrates the point in any case. Apparently the NBA bought a bunch of cameras that are intended to track ballistic missiles. So like these are very precise cameras. They can pivot very quickly. They're very unspeakably high quality cameras, right? And they plug 4 of them into the roof of every NBA stadium and just use them to track player movements, right? They track what your hands are doing. They track what your feet are doing. They track where your center of mass is. They track everything, right? So they're collecting terabytes and terabytes of data every game. Just this staggering amount of information, right? Like you open the Excel spreadsheet and Excel crashes because it can't handle that much information, right? And so you have to do it all via command line, right? And so just huge amounts of data, and you're like, oh my gosh, right? Like there's so much information there. We could figure out every player's weaknesses. We could figure out all kinds of things. Oh my goodness, this is so exciting. And it's like, but can you ask the right question, right? Like how can you find the right tree in that forest of trees? Right? It's not about applying the statistical tests. Applying the statistical test is the easy part. You type in 1 line of code and you're done. Right? The hard part is figuring out which statistical test to apply and which question you're even trying to answer. Right? Like
and that requires context. It requires contextual breadth to say what exactly am I doing?
So I push back against that. I'm like, hey, if you want to be a data analyst or a data scientist, liberal arts education, pretty hot stuff. Pretty hot stuff. Much more useful than you would think it is. And I would also say that in many cases you're practicing sort of liberal arts-esque principles without realizing it.
Everyone is practicing philosophy all the time. But it's a little bit like that word, education, drawing out something that is already there. Liberal arts education is something that you are already doing. The fact that you're watching this sort of podcast in the first place is evidence that you're interested in ideas. You're interested. The fact that you're interested means you're doing the thing. Now the question is, how do you take it bigger, better, faster, stronger, and just make it more? That's education, is the increase of something that is effectively already there. So how do you increase in liberal arts education? You ask questions, you read books, you get into discussions with people who are at a similar level. And I mean, there's a lot of specific training that's very helpful. A little bit of formal logic is an incredibly helpful thing, although too much of a good thing might be damaging, I guess. You have some pretty strong opinions about formal logic training.
Before we jump into that, I just want to wrap up the whole prepare you for a job point. I cannot find the quote, but I can remember basically what it says, so there we go. And basically, he's talking about rhetorical education, which comes down to, he's talking about the aspects of rhetorical education that are very technical, right? Learning delivery techniques, learning the different figures of speech. And what he says is, it's actually not that hard to learn all those figures. It's not actually that hard to learn all the techniques. But what really sets great orators apart is their ability to stitch all those techniques together, to use the right forms, to use the right techniques, to use the right tropes, to forge them into persuasive and coherent arguments. And then, most important of all, to be able to place those well-dressed arguments into the right contexts, to answer the right questions and fix the right problems.
It's applied decision-making.
And so basically he says, the technical aspect of this, I mean, he's again exaggerating, I think, slightly, right? Like the technical aspect is not that easy, right? Of anything, right? But he says, look, the technical aspect is the relatively easy part. What really sets, excellent people apart is their ability to pick and choose the right techniques and apply them to the situation around them. And that, again, is liberal arts. So, yeah, you want a good job, learn to code, but learn liberal arts too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think my dad gave some really valuable advice in that domain. He said, learn a trade and then go to college and do both. And did I follow that advice terribly well? No, I didn't. But my brother did. My brother has training as a qualified welder, and in addition to that, he's going to get his university degree. And so that means that he has a skill that he can use to provide for himself in the meantime while he is pursuing his higher education. And that's a really, really cool thing.
So what are we going to jump into? How do you cultivate this? Is that where we're going?
I think that's a very natural segue. One other thing I want to kind of sell first is the value of liberal arts education to society more broadly. And you had a professor who was teaching Isocrates in your master's degree.
Yes.
And you were studying a master's degree in English. English is kind of loosely a liberal arts degree.
And to many people, it feels like a floofy-woofy degree. Right? It feels very not real.
You can study English in a way that's useless, or you can study in a way that's useful. And it depends on whether you're training these liberal arts principles and really getting them into your soul and becoming, dangerous as a result. But, one of the classic questions that's posed of someone who studies rhetoric is, rhetoric is just a way to bamboozle people, right? So was Hitler a good speaker? Because, I mean, he was effective. Crowds followed him. So does that technically mean that he was a good rhetorician? And your professor's answer was just fascinating.
Do you want me to? Yeah, sure.
Throw that out
So,
there.
and I just want to add also, this is sort of a version of the question, was Hitler a good leader? Which if I was in a cutting and disparaging mood, I would say in second-rate leadership seminars, this is a common question, right? Was Hitler a good leader? And everyone's like, well, he was very effective. He marshaled the people in a common cause. Of course, he's a very good leader. Just because he's a bad person doesn't mean he's not a good leader, right? And other people, will take up the opposite cause and say, well, but he's a bad person, therefore he can't be a bad leader. And exactly. And so it's a variant of that question, all right? And my professor's answer was, well, he's not a good speaker. The German people are bad listeners, right? They're a bad audience, right? And I thought that was so interesting, because the basic question of whether or not he's a good speaker or a good leader comes down to, well, is morality an inherent part of is morality tied to technical skill, right? Is moral virtue tied to technical skill, right? And the argument on one side says, well, but like he marshaled a bunch of people, like by any ordinary term, he's a good leader and a good speaker, right? And then the other side is like, well, but we can't call that a good leader because that means that our leadership schools are insanely dangerous because we're teaching people to be little Hitlers. That's not okay, right? So my professor's answer was, yes, they are united. Morality and technical excellence, you can't be a good speaker without being moral and skilled. Which then puts you in the conundrum, well then, but he sure looks like what is then your explanation of what happened? Right, and her explanation of what happened is, he's not a good speaker, they're bad listeners. They're bad at judging character, they're bad at judging his arguments, they're bad at seeing where his speech and his proposals are going to lead them. And actually, I think one of the strongest pieces of evidence you can marshal in favor of this is that now, the German people after World War II, pretty much dumped Hitler. They pretty much dumped Hitler and the Nazis, right? Which means that at least the German people implicitly said, hey, look,
we screwed up.
Yeah, we made a mistake, right? And maybe you can say that Hitler in some respects is a good speaker, in some respects is not. That's not the point. But the point is there was a bad audience there, and that bad audience bears a lot of responsibility.
Yeah. It's the negotiation that's inherent in speaking. The way that we like to think about rhetoric following Aristotle's view is that you just need to figure out the audience and then you tell them the right things and you use your timing. It's logos, pathos, kairos, and
ethos,
ethos,
et cetera.
It's those four. Typically it's divided into 3 plus timing. Mm-hmm. And if you get those just right, then you can manipulate the person into doing whatever it is that you want to do. And that ignores the fact that a speech can be terminated, especially let's imagine you're broadcasting a video like this. Mm-hmm. The listener can turn it off at any time.
Mm-hmm. Or generate counter arguments in their mind.
Right.
Just because you're using all the tricks doesn't mean that they have to agree with you. They don't have to buy it. And the better they are arguing, the less likely it is that they will buy it. Or should we say, the more skilled they are in rhetoric or liberal arts.
Yes, and I think you can kind of, especially the way Socrates teaches them, they're kind of the same thing. It's this applied decision-making ability where you're good at argument, you're good at having a broad base of contextual information, and just kind of enough of what's going on that you can make judgments yourself. And you can have discussions with people that help you to make good decisions, where you're able to pick out the good information from the person, what you're hearing from the other people, and make those quality judgments yourself. And that idea that it's the German people who are bad listeners means that they are complicit in the public speaking and in the political decisions of the Hitler. And that means fundamentally that good liberal arts education that cultivates personal judgment and personal responsibility is vital for keeping any free society alive, because it means that you're able to cut through the crap and stop listening to the bad politicians, and you'll have less of them because they can get less traction going in the first place.
And not even, certainly on a societal level, right, you will be less persuaded by demagogues, and therefore you will have better leaders, right, because you will have a better judge of character, but also in your own individual life, you will be better at living with a family, you will be better at having good friendships, you will be better in all kinds of societal and civic functions. you'll be better at negotiating your relationships with your significant other. You'll see red flags associated with different places of employment or coworkers, right? Like it's this very, or at least it claims to be, and I believe it is, this exceedingly generalized property of good judgment and decision making.
And it's important to qualify a little bit, because I'm not saying that everyone achieves the highest level in this thing, but the idea of education, drawing out of a person what's already there, is that you can take wherever you're at and enhance it to a certain degree. And maybe you don't enhance it to perfection, where you have perfect judgment and you see everything on the first try. Mm-hmm. But can you imagine if everyone in your society was better than they themselves were, a couple of years ago? That's amazing, and it's enough. It's enough to make the society run right. Just better. All
or at least run better.
Is better at a broad quality level.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, do we want to talk about how to
do the thing?
Yes, because I would just love to take. I already want to go a certain place with this. There's many places we could go, but one certain place we could go is I have wondered for years about the role of universities and schools in this.
Yeah.
Because formal education is expensive, right? Post-secondary education is expensive.
And more expensive than necessary.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, and in many cases, you're not getting, in terms of the liberal arts education, you're not getting good bang for your buck, right?
No.
I'll be the first person to say, actually, like, you and I had different graduate experiences, but my graduate experience was very much liberal arts-esque, right? Like, it was very student-driven in many ways. It was very discussion-oriented, very open to lines of inquiry, very investigative, very discussion-based. And I suspect that, many graduate academic degrees are like that, because that's what they've always been designed to be. Not that there aren't some exceptions, but that's a good general rule. But, like your undergrad is most often not very much like this at all.
There's a little more indoctrination, a little less individual thinking.
Yeah. And so I can't help but back up and wonder, especially in light of the fact that, you've sometimes said that a liberal arts education at its worst is nothing but a glorified book club. Right.
It's at its worst, it's an indoctrination camp. It's
but that's
the People's Liberation Army, where all you do is
the counter argument is that that doesn't even fall in the category of liberal arts education. Like when you are doing a liberal arts education, but it's going wrong, it can turn into just a glorified book club.
Yeah.
Right.
And
what's interesting to me,
a glorified book club is a way to disparage it from the outside, but not the inside. Because even if it is a glorified book club, the thing about book clubs, and the reason why they're so valuable, is even though we kind of laugh at book clubs and say, oh, it's just a book club, they're just talking about the books they wrote, ha 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 ha, except that's the actual verb for how you get this kind of education. So even if you call it a glorified book club, that's a slur, but they're actually doing the thing.
Mm-hmm. It's also a compliment in some sense.
Yeah.
So that's which leads me to where I was going, which is, honestly, I think one of the questions you have to ask is, how important are universities in all this? Why, should I pay $6,000 in tuition a semester for something that I can do for free online or with my friends? What am I getting out of doing it at a university that is worth $6,000 a semester?
Yeah,
or more, because if you're actually going to a liberal arts college, you're probably paying more. But okay, the point is, however much money it is, right? It feels very much, all these books are in the public domain, right? And books are not that expensive anyway, right? There's so much information available for free. It's never been easier to do the liberal arts in sort of an ad hoc way without institutional support. So that's my question. Do we need institutional support at all? And if so, what kind?
The answer, briefly, is, do you need it? The answer is a flat no. It is a flat no, without any equivocation. Now the question is, will the university help? And the answer for that is yes.
Or at least maybe.
And the degree to which it helps is the degree to which the degree and the price tag attached to that degree are worth it. So how big is the difference between you and some earnest study and a library card, and hopefully, because this is one of the things that you have to do. It's not enough to study by yourself when you're trying to get...
I was going to say, I'm including, right, there's so many online forums. It's never been easy to go find some wacko community on the internet that is interested in the same like little niche. Like this is one of the things that like we've learned from different kinds of fandoms and sort of nerdy stuff, right? Is that like, you know, whatever obscure book series or TV show or whatever that you like, you can go find everyone on the internet who's interested in it too, and suddenly there's 3,000 of you.
Yeah, and you can
Right.
all talk about it. And
Yeah,
share
exactly.
This thing.
Right. So I mean, it feels like it's never been easier in some sense to do
get
this,
that community
to get that
and
community without the institutional support.
YouTube, I think there's a place for Twitch streaming book clubs. Like that's a thing that should.
I've wanted to do that for a long time. So
Yeah.
actually, if you guys are interested,
Comments
please
below.
tell me, because you know, don't threaten me with a good time. I would be excited to do that.
Are you kidding? That would be amazing. Liberal arts education in the age of the internet is a different animal than it's ever been, and I think that
I mean, it
takes
used to be the sorry, I'm interrupting.
$300,000 degree and destroys
Well, and
it.
like even in the 1800s, like where are you going? I mean, I'm generalizing a little bit, but like where are you going to find people who are talking about this stuff? You have to go to a university because that's sort of where they're all
Where it's all happening.
that's where they're all congregated,
Yeah.
right? That's the Discord group. That's the sub forum. That's the whatever it is.
Yes, especially, yes, absolutely. And so the ingredients you need are good books that stretch your thinking. You need your own questions and your own thirst for learning. That's kind of the key thing. That's the single biggest, most important thing. And then the last thing you need is community. You need people to bounce ideas off who occasionally disagree with you. And that disagreement and the discussion that kind of emerges from that, the give and take and negotiation that happens in a good discussion group is absolutely critical to making this thing work. If you can find that discussion group in your own neighborhood, great. If you can find it online, great. The last thing that's kind of connected to that community thing is mentors. It's really helpful to have somebody who you deeply respect on that breadth level, who can recommend books to you and say, you know what you really need right now is this, and then can push you in that way, and push you in your own journey and kind of draw these things out of you. Socrates described himself as the gadfly and also as the midwife of ideas. Talk about taking that draw out metaphor, that I am going to encourage, coach, and help you to manage this childbirth thing safely as you're birthing out your own ideas. Now, is there
And
a
of
place
course, in
for
keeping
the
with the
university?
metaphor, there was a lot of screaming involved.
Oh, there was tons of screaming. They didn't always like it. You did this to me!
Sorry, you were saying, so what
So the university and finding essentially good coaches is still a valuable thing. You need to find ones that are worth the price that you're paying, for sure.
Well,
and I'm going to make a shameless pitch for Monticello College because
please do, as far as I'm concerned.
as far as Glorified Book Club goes, that's what we do. We're very
It's the
dedicated
best
to the
book
idea
club.
well, not. I don't know that it's the best, but it's the best that I've found so far. We're very interested in this, inspire, not require, and in mentors, not professors. I'm strictly speaking not a professor. It's not something we encourage, because a professor professes, tries to indoctrinate, and that's not my job. So there's a lot of value, and we've worked really hard to keep the price tag down. So including housing and food and everything else, you're paying less than you're paying around $10,000 a year, and so you compare that with a $300,000 in debt degree.
At very least, it's a much cheaper book club than a liberal arts university.
The technical skills that seem to be absent from the liberal arts are something that we focus on. So you learn how to grow food, manage animals, take care of your off-grid solar needs, and build a house by the time you graduate, and also do a little bit of wilderness survival. And so by the time you finish, you have both the technical stuff that's going to allow you to feed yourself and this freedom-loving liberal arts degree. So I think there's some real value in what it is that we're teaching. Of course I think that. I mean, I'm biased, of course, but if you're interested, we'll leave links in the description below, and hopefully I'll see you next year. But there's a lot of value there.
If you are going through a more traditional university, and you may have heard this advice before, but if not, then you need to hear it now, is take classes from professors. That is, take classes because there's a certain professor attached to it. And this gets more and more important the more degrees you accumulate and the more you go into schooling, for a whole variety of reasons. One, you're going to need professors who can write you good letters of recommendation for grad school, so you need to be forming those relationships with professors, both for your future prospects if you're going further in academia, but also just in general so that you can get more out of the classes, right? So that it is more than just watching a lecture on YouTube. Now it is an interactive relationship that you can seriously profit from. And then, like when you go higher in academia, it's really interesting to me that like the way professors will often describe their own credentials is they say, I studied with X person.
Yes.
Right. That is, it's not, it's not, I mean, it is the institution that they got that degree from as well. But it seems even more importantly, I studied with this person, right? Like I talked to them, I had conversations with them, they critiqued and corrected my work. And I had to, I had to satisfy them. My work had to meet their standards.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you certainly can do this in many respects. And I consider myself pretty fortunate in that, like, I've found some pretty solid professors who, even now I can go back to and get advice and insight. And I value their insight. What I do think is missing in many of even those situations is that dimension of sort of personal development. In most respects, even the professors I've had, both in my undergrad and graduate programs, who, I respect their ideas so much, and they are so interesting. I love to talk to them, and I'd kill for their feedback. I wouldn't kill for their feedback, but you understand. Even then, they don't have the same sort of, they're not necessarily as interested in my psychological or character development, right? And I mean, I'm trying to be measured with this criticism because that's my primary responsibility, not theirs. But I think that one thing that Monticello College seems interested in, and that a really good educational institution would be interested in, is your character development.
Yeah.
And that's hamstrung in many ways due to institutional constraints and things like that, right? Like I'm only partially faulting the professors because it's a complex situation. But overall, it would be better if there was more character-based education
breadth
in our educational institutions. Yeah, breadth is pretty close to the same
or
thing.
holistic is another word that you could use. That it's
Yes.
interested in building the whole person.
Uh-huh.
And that means that a well-educated person is somebody who's going to take care of their spirit, their mind, and their body well. And also their emotional state. Like they're going to be well-trained in all of these aspects and able to take care of themselves and their household and their family well. Mm-hmm. We don't think about homemaking as a thing that you need education for. Like it tends to be quite disparaged, but like, and it also tends to be feminized, that homemaking is something that only a woman does. But to really make a home, like to really make your home life where you live and where you spend all your time where you're not at work, and to make that excellent, that would be another thing that a liberal arts education ought to improve. It should improve the discussions around the dinner table, and it should improve how likely it is that you're going to do the dishes right after they're made dirty rather than a couple days later. It should mm-hmm. really improve your character in how you live at the most general and basic level of your life, the most good and basic education you can get.
Mm-hmm. Which is something that Isocrates points out. He's like, look, I don't care how many, functionally, I'm paraphrasing him now, I don't care how many degrees you have if you can't manage your own affairs well.
Yeah.
Okay, so we are getting, I think, close to time. Do you want to do a speed round where
I do want to do a second discussion where we talk more about the how-to, like how to get a liberal arts education, like a second installment in the series.
Yes, I think at some point we probably will have to do that. To wrap up what I was thinking, if you're okay with this, is I want to do a speed round where we each take turns naming a random area of study or area of practice, whatever, very broad here, and then you get 10 seconds to say whether or not it counts as liberal arts education, why or why not. And you're also allowed to say yes as long as you do it in a certain way or whatever, right? The only restriction is, you name something and then you get 10 seconds to respond. Yeah?
I'm trying to decide why I have such a negative reaction to this idea. It's mostly because you can do all of the things in a liberal arts way.
Yeah, that's the point. That's the point.
Engineering.
That's the point of this exercise.
Okay, let's do it.
Okay, so fire away.
Engineering.
Yes, as long as you. My answer is yes, as long as you go beyond it and study lots of other things well too.
Sure.
Roofing a house.
Yes, because the self-reliance aspect is part of managing your own affairs well. If you're at least capable of it, you can also judge whether or not the guy you're hiring to roof your house is going to do a good job.
Okay.
Calligraphy.
Yes, especially if you use it. This is actually an ancient pedagogical technique. Is especially if you use it to write down the most important quotes that you think are important. For your personal development and stuff like that.
And put them on the wall.
Yeah.
Decorate house with
it. Formal logic.
Oh, heck yes.
Was that too much of a softball?
It is so incredibly valuable for being able to diagnose the arguments and it enriches your discussions and your own thinking, and it allows you to have fun with puzzles. Like, your quality of life is so staggeringly improved by a study of logic. I can't begin to recommend it enough. I cannot begin. It's amazing. Let's see here.
Photography. Yes, and I would say it depends a lot on what you take pictures of. It depends on whether what you take pictures of, how you're, like, I don't want to say the message you're sending because I don't want it to be propagandistic, but it depends a lot on the content. But I would say, yeah, absolutely, particularly if the content is good.
Yeah, it cultivates the eye.
I mean, there's also formal aspects there too. Okay, baking.
Baking. Yes, I included homemaking beforehand. Baking, yes, and also cooking more broadly could be liberal arts, especially since they cultivate some personal judgment. Like, you modify recipes.
Taste and judgment. Okay.
Taste and judgment is a thing that you do, and also awareness of other people. Because if you're baking and you might have.
And everybody hates your baking, then you might be doing something wrong.
You have to enter into a negotiation with people to be able to figure out what they're actually going to eat and like. And also you have to match people's needs, like if you have the gluten-free person in the family. Mm-hmm. Mathematics.
Mathematics. I'm going to take a page out of Isocrates. It's a good mental exercise that's useful for many things. However, I think to be properly educated in the liberal arts, you have to go beyond it. So basically I view it as good gymnastics for liberal arts.
Awesome.
Oh shoot, I had a really good one. Rats. Riding a bicycle.
Riding a bicycle. Yes, funny enough, when the bicycle was first invented, it was seen as kind of dangerous for how liberating it was for women. And so riding a bicycle is one of those things that increases your personal autonomy.
Literally liberated. It increases your autonomy.
It increases your autonomy and your ability to travel.
So riding a bicycle makes you more free.
It does. It makes you radically more free. Yeah.
Okay, your turn.
Okay, carpentry.
Carpentry. Yes, but I'm thinking of all the ways you could use it, because I know carpenters who I don't think have a good liberal arts education, and I also see carpenters who do. So I guess I think the difference is, if I were a carpenter and I was interested in the liberal arts, I'd think a lot about why I'm doing what I'm doing. That would be my advice.
A lot of this seems to be focused very much on how you're approaching it. Some fields seem to aim more directly
lend
at that
themselves
because
a
they
little
have
more naturally.
less practical aspect, which means you have to lean into the liberal arts or else you don't have anything.
Although I think mathematics is one that is highly theoretical, but also requires a lot of extra work and discipline to make it a good liberal arts education. Yeah, I think you have to go far beyond mathematics in order to make mathematics a component of a liberal arts education.
Yeah.
Synthesizing proteins, or synthesizing DNA. I hope I'm using the right words. I swear. Sorry, I'm the quickfire format is killing me here. But yeah, what is it called when you take apart DNA? Dentistry. Let's go with dentistry.
Dentistry. Can it be liberal arts? Yes, actually. So I was chatting with my dentist friend, and there's an art aspect and there's a business management aspect, and dentistry is one of the weird professions where did you know the average the median income for or maybe it's the mean in the United States is something like $300,000 a year.
I was aware it was some stupidly high number.
It's a stupidly high number because if you're a dentist, the likelihood that you're also an independent business owner is quite high, and the fact that you own the tools of your own trade and are a generalist who is running spreadsheets, doing cosmetic dentistry and working on people's health. I mean, you're part doctor, part sculptor, and part businessman. And that breadth is kind of a cool liberal arts thing. And I find that dentists are actually pretty fun people to talk to because the chances are that they've studied German literature on top of everything else. That breadth tends to beget more breadth.
Interesting.
Softball, literature.
I'm going to say it's a big fat it depends.
On what?
It depends. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to figure out, because my thoughts aren't coherent enough on that. So I'm just meaning that I see a lot of different ways that it can be good and a lot of different ways that it can be bad, and it's hard to sort of unite all those under a set of universally applicable principles. Yeah. So I'm just going to say, in general, it depends. And no, just because you're studying English doesn't mean you're getting a liberal arts degree.
That is true.
So that's my little, there's my little statement.
It's entirely possible to get a quote-unquote liberal arts topic degree, such as philosophy or literature, and to absolutely mess it up.
I know you have mixed feelings about your law degree. I mean, mixed feelings, right?
Yeah.
Positive and negative. So law.
Law. It absolutely can be. It's one of those things where if you study law, it opens up a lot of liberal arts topics. There's a lot of discussions that can be had about, let's say, conflict of laws. That's a class that kind of lends itself to a discussion of the liberal arts. Like at what point, and that gets to these philosophical questions about when two sovereigns, when they both want to resolve an issue, like how exactly do you define sovereignty? How do you grapple with these questions? There is some breadth involved. I think, honestly, you get more out of law school if you treat it as a trade school. But even then...
You treat it as a special ability in art or a science.
Exactly.
Rather than...
And the trouble with law is that law school education in the UK is very theoretical and very liberal artsy. Law school education in the United States tends to be a little bit more practical, but it's still not practical enough to justify itself on that ground alone. It is a thinly veiled barrier to entry that is used to weed out potential lawyers while not actually teaching you how to practice law. So that is part of my critique.
Okay, let's toss. So we're over 10 seconds, and let's toss two more so that we don't end on such a downer note. But no, that is interesting.
Yeah.
Your turn.
I need to find a good one. I've already used mathematics, and you've already used baking. So what else is there? I want something that's not incredibly technical, because my brain tends to run to things like furniture making and refrigerator repair.
Think of a university field.
A university field. Geography.
Yes, I would say absolutely. It's particularly because you're likely to learn about other places and cultures. That is a good way and place to get that breadth.
Yeah.
So I'll say yes.
Languages in particular seem to be particularly good at that.
Yes. Okay, so I think we'll close up for today. Thank you very much for listening, and we look forward to hearing your comments in the video comments section. Sorry, that was a little garbled, but thank you very much. We'll talk to you next time. Have a great day.